beautiful people, welcome back to my channel, Pretty Girls Love Horror, where I give you all things horror content, horror movie reviews, horror series, recaps, commentary, and in this video I will be giving you my top 10 best horror movies of 2023, and I will be ranking them from 10 to the number one best horror of 2023 in my humble opinion. If you are a horror fan and you like all things horror, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so that you will be alerted whenever I post content. Also, let me know in the comments, how do you feel about my ranking? Now, overall, I don't think 2023 was a terrible year for horror movies. I don't think it was a great year for horror movies. It was fine. Wasn't the worst, wasn't the best. It was just fine. I do think we got some gems, which I am here to talk about. So let's get right into our ranking. And remember, this is just subjective. These are my opinions on my experience with the movies that I watched last year. So let me know in the comments how you feel. Coming in at number 10, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which is pretty much a 30 Days of Night meets A Perfect Storm. We have Dracula on a ship in the cargo hold, unbeknownst to the crew. Now, I admittedly am enjoying this movie less and less the more I rewatch it, which is why it is coming in at number 10. But I do think it is still worthy of being in my best of. I went to the theaters to watch The Last Voyage of the Demeter and I loved it. I walked out pretty much raving about this movie. Yes, it has its flaws, but my overall experience with The Last Voyage of the Demeter was very positive. However, on rewatch, it is starting to lose its luster just a bit for me. Now, I initially felt like we had a strong opening, a strong setup, a nice group of characters, a good lead, capable lead, if not, not for the fact that he was written a little sanctimoniously, but I liked everything with the cast, with the setup, and I felt like the movie had like a slow build but satisfying. I still get a lot of enjoyment out of this movie. We do get some fun kills. I don't know why we keep messing with kids. I swear we are terrorizing and killing kids a lot more in horror these days than we ever did before. Like, we have always terrorized kids, but I swear it is getting way more prevalent. But with The Last Voyage of the Demeter, I personally love an isolated setup. We are in the middle of the ocean and we have a viable reason why the crew does not want to dock the ship once bodies start dropping. And yes, as more people are getting killed, it is a bit ridiculous that we want to just continue on the voyage, but it's plausible enough. I mean, desperate people do things, desperate things for money. So, and I will say, as much as I enjoyed the co-captain, love the actor, enjoyed the character, the way that he just kept being in the now about what was happening, it does get more irksome as the movie goes on. But we have a great setup. It is literally like a Dracula slasher. Okay, we have Dracula as Ghostface. That is basically how the movie feels, and I think it does well at playing on this isolated location. We really have just this one setting, and yeah, there's some inconsistencies, some things that doesn't make much sense, but I think it is an overall one of the best efforts in horror last year. And I like how things wrap up and the actual end of the situation on the ship. But one thing I didn't like from the moment I saw the movie was the actual very ending sequence of the movie. I feel like we could have cut that out. It's not only just a terrible sequence, but it's very unnecessary. I mean, obviously that ending sequence is because they are trying to set up a sequel, but we could have got something better than that. From the moment I saw this movie, I just was like, okay, we could have cut that out. But I absolutely love our hero here, our main character. I like our cast of characters. And I feel like I like this cast of characters because typically when you get a group together in a synopsis like this, you typically have like the a-hole for no reason character, the obnoxious character, somebody that's going to be annoying. And I felt like all of the characters were pretty pleasant to follow along in this scenario. And no, we don't really get very much, with the characters. We're not extremely emotionally invested in the characters, but they are solid and enjoyable to follow nonetheless. Now, coming in at number 9 is Birth Rebirth. And I feel contradictory in my feelings with Birth Rebirth. This movie is about a woman whose daughter gets killed, and she goes to try to get the body of her little girl, and the hospital tries to say, the body was lost, we don't know what happened. But what really happens is that a doctor takes the corpse because she is doing experiments on bringing dead people back to life. She started with a pig that she successfully reanimated, and now she is trying with the little girl. And the mom eventually finds out what happened and decides to join. Okay, we're gonna bring my daughter back from the dead. I'm on board. And honestly, I have not seen enough people talk about this movie. It is very interesting, and I feel contradictory in my feelings about the movie because honestly, I feel like my ending feelings on the movie once it was over was a lot more, I had a higher enjoyment looking back once the movie ended than I did when I was actually sitting through the movie, if that makes sense. Honestly, it started off strong. It hooked me in. I was very intrigued, but it did start to get a little boring for me, and I was honestly just about to cut the movie off because one thing I will do is not finish a movie. I was just about to cut the movie off when the daughter is reanimated and comes back to life, and I was like, oh shoot, which isn't a spoiler. That's the premise of the movie. But I was like, oh shoot, okay, and then I continued to watch, but I was literally just about to cut the movie off. But I feel like this was such an interesting exploration with these two characters, and we definitely got a really odd, unique, quirky character with the doctor, and I also feel contradictory in my feelings about the lead with this well, both the women are leads, but with the doctor, like I said, she's very quirky, very odd, and very interesting character to follow. However, I get the performance of the actor. I get what we were doing with the character, but it just didn't feel like an exciting or enough performance to follow so much throughout the course of this movie. Yeah, so on one hand, very interesting character, but on the other hand, not interesting enough for us to follow as much as we did, if that makes any sense. But the way the movie ends, and I always feel like the third act, the ending, the way a movie goes out can really make or break feelings on a movie. You can be really enjoying a movie and then it ends in a way that puts a bad taste in your mouth. Or you can kind of have a middle of the road experience with a movie, which honestly is what I was having with Birth Rebirth. But it can end in a way that oh shoot, and it kind of catapults your opinion. The movie cuts off and it's like, what the hell? In the best way. What the hell? And I can't really say much more than that, but it definitely is one of those situations where it subverts your expectations of the characters, of the situation, of where you think the story will go. So I feel like this should be on a lot more people's radar. Number 8, When Evil Lurks. We have a horror movie that a ton of people have been massively raving about. I was really excited to see this one. And honestly, on my first watch, I really didn't like this movie. And on a few rewatches, I enjoyed it a lot more. I could appreciate the positives a lot more. But When Evil Lurks is a movie about two of the dumbest brothers in the history of the world who are in the middle of this sort of possession pandemic. And I absolutely love the possession horror subgenre. I know it can get very generic, but I am a person who, I'm not religious, but I believe in ghosts and spirits and all that stuff. So that is my favorite, one of my favorite subgenres, because it genuinely creeps me out in real life. Like if you tell me a house is haunted or an object is haunted, I'm gonna believe you. So I really love that subgenre, and I just get an enjoyment out of it, but the movies can get very generic. So I do love the fact that When Evil Lurks takes a completely different approach and spin on that possession subgenre. We are dealing with possession, but it feels like a zombie outbreak, if that makes sense. But another subgenre that a lot of people don't like and say it can get very generic. But we have this possession, and it's a situation where it's very known to the point that the authorities have a whole protocol, right? And I just, when it comes to the story and the characters, I found myself extremely frustrated throughout the watch, and I can't really enjoy or have good thoughts about a movie that just has me in a constant state of frustration and agitation. I feel like the characters literally did not make one good decision the entire runtime. They made the absolute worst decisions the entire time. And a lot of things with the story was just nonsensical as far as the rules of this world that they are creating within When Evil Lurks. It doesn't even make any sense. It's kind of like they're making stuff up as they go along. It's very ambiguous. Like, the rules aren't very clear, and that's honestly a pet peeve of mine when I watch a movie. I need the movie to be very clear about its rules and follow its own rules. Like, follow your own rules and be clear with the audience on the rules. And something else with the story that really irked me and hindered my enjoyment was the fact that we're not in that typical setup of a movie where we have to try to convince people that something is real. This is a known thing. But what happens in the movie is we still have to go through that typical nobody believes you about what's happening scenario, because apparently this possession thing is prevalent in the cities, not in a small town. But that makes absolutely no sense to me. If you tell me that something is happening in a city, it is not so dramatically far-fetched for me to believe that it could happen in my small town. So that irked me a lot. But on rewatch, I didn't let the leads bother me so much. But I can't put this movie much higher because I need likable leads. I need leads that I like and root for. I could have cared less if everybody in the movie died. And I can't put your movie much higher if I don't have any real stakes, if I'm not really invested in the survival, in the journey of the lead characters that I'm following. But I feel like with a movie like When Evil Lurks, everything that they do as far as the effects, as far as the actual horror elements, they were so good that this movie just has to be in the best of the year, because that aspect was really good. Now, it wasn't mind-blowing. It wasn't the best I've ever seen. It wasn't the best in the last 5 years of horror even. But it was good. It was solid. It was great. It was very well done and executed. Number 7 is Dark Harvest. We have a teen horror about a small town that sacrifices their boys to fight off and kill this pumpkin head type monster. And I'm actually very surprised that I even like this movie. This was one of the last movies I watched last year because I personally am not a fan of teen horror. I used to be, and I be feeling like an old maid sometimes because I cannot with teenage characters. They are always written basically the same. It's like we have the same little 5 teen character types and we just recycle them in every single horror movie. And the teen characters are always written just so obnoxious. And I, like the teens in Thanksgiving, I wanted to bash my head against the wall. I could not stand those teenagers. But Dark Harvest was such a surprise, enjoying watch for me. We do have the typical bully characters, which I absolutely hate when anytime we're dealing with teens or kids, we always have to throw in a bully, and it really irks me. But I feel like this was a lot easier to swallow because Dark Harvest honestly has my number one favorite atmosphere in a movie of all 2023. It is very much going to be my rewatch every single Halloween season. We got two great, like, staple Halloween movies this year. The next will become, the next movie will be in the list. But this was a really good Halloween atmosphere that they created. This dark atmosphere. We have this small town set. It feels like it's set in like the 60s. I love everything that they set up with this. The gore was so good. I was so genuinely shocked at how dark the movie goes when we are dealing with a teen horror. The whole situation of the fates of these kids and what this town is doing, how they are sacrificing these kids. They pretty much have a setup where all of the teen boys are locked up. They are not given food or water, and then they are kicked out of the house, locked out of the house. They cannot come inside, and they're sent out into the streets, ravenous, hungry, to hunt this creature. And only one person can be the winner. So we're sacrificing the lives of these kids and the fates of these kids and what's happening. A lot of the story just was a lot darker than I would expect a teen horror to have the guts to, like, really go there. And in particular, we had a great scene with this blood waterfall and the actual creature design of this Pumpkinhead type creature. I keep calling him Pumpkinhead because we put this scarecrow up, and then the scarecrow comes to life every Halloween, and we have to stop him from getting to the church. I would just call him a Pumpkinhead, child. But this movie did such a good job with all of those horror elements, and I feel like, yes, the main character that we follow, he does come across as like a rebel without a cause, obnoxious teen. But I don't know if it was just the charisma of the actor. It was a lot easier for me to swallow and to enjoy going along the ride. Even though his whole motive of trying to prove himself, it really doesn't make much sense. Like I said, he just feels like a rebel without a cause. But we have another lead where it's his love interest. She was very easy to root for. He was honestly easy to root for despite those issues I had with his character motivations. But I feel like we could make this into a franchise, in my opinion. Like, I would love to revisit this. Now, I do feel like I don't like how the movie ends. It wasn't very satisfying, as well as being a bit predictable. But overall, very, very, very solid work. Number 6 is Cobweb. Another great horror, Halloween staple that we got this year. Cobweb is a story about a young kid who tries to convince his parents that there is something living in the wall talking to him, and his parents don't believe him. I saw this in theaters and I absolutely loved it. Again, we're dealing with the kid. We're dealing with bullies. I really want writers to come up with better ideas of displaying that a child or teen actor is an outcast or whatever outside of bullying. Like, goddamn, can we please get inventive? Can we please think of another way to write? I don't know why we always gotta throw in a damn bully child, but anyway. Cobweb, for me, it does have its weaknesses, but it really stands out for me in the positives. The performances of the parents is what is really taking this movie up a notch. And I mean, the lead, he's very endearing, very easy to root for and invest in, but the performances of the parents were so freaking good. Shout out to those actors. I will say, we have a whole situation with a teacher that tries to help. We have this reveal at the end that just doesn't work for me. But as a whole, this definitely sets the stage for a really good Halloween night, Halloween season watch. Coming in at number 5, another movie people just raved about that I may not be in the same boat as everybody else. Saw X. Now, a lot of people have been saying some crazy stuff about Saw X. Crazy to me. Calling it the best of the franchise. I'm so sorry. I cannot hold that flag. But this was definitely a great rejuvenation to the franchise. And I am one of those people that absolutely love the Saw franchise. I've loved it since the beginning. I still remember seeing the movies in theaters when it first came out. And for me personally, that Saw trilogy is such perfection. One of my favorite trilogies ever of any genre. I cannot say that Saw X is better than that original trilogy. It was a bit lackluster for me at that the first half. Because I feel like we tried too hard to display John Kramer as this victim, as this like sickly old man that even a naivete, like who gets conned. And I'm just like, come on now, baby, this is Jigsaw. Like, this is Jigsaw. Come on now, baby. This is the man that think you should die if you in a love triangle or you cheat on your wife. Like, come on now. Let's not go there. And I feel like we did not even have to ham it up that much with the story, because we're dealing with a group of villains that are taking advantage of dying cancer patients. That's enough. Like, we didn't have to even throw in what we were doing with the John Kramer character, because that is enough. And I get it, we're putting a villainous character against villainous characters, and we need to make the new villainous characters like more villainous so that the audience will be on Jigsaw's side. I get that. But coming up with the setup that they are conning cancer patients, that is enough to get us on the franchise's villain's side. I absolutely love Jigsaw, but that is not a villain that I root for. That is not a character that I root for at all. But it wasn't hard in this movie to get the audience to root for him when we're dealing with a group of cons that are doing what they are doing. Now, once we get... Now, and it's not that I didn't enjoy the first half. I was enjoying it, but then it got a little lackluster for me, and I was kind of over how we were painting John Kramer. But once we get to the kidnapping, that's when I really start to be like, oh, hell yes. Like, this is a 5-star movie. Once we hit that point. Now, before that point, I was feeling more like, oh, this is like a 3 out of 5-star movie. But once we get to the actual meat of what's happening and we get the kidnapping and all of those events pop off, that's when it turns into a 5-star film for me. And I absolutely, me personally, I love a villain. I love a villain. I love a good villain. And we are pitting someone against the villain of Jigsaw, and we did perfectly. I loved the villain we got in this movie. That was the perfect villain to go head to head with Jigsaw. But what is very disappointing to me with this movie is we don't even really get that. She like I said, Jigsaw will kill people if you scuff somebody white sneakers. Like, if you run a stop sign, you're going to have to die. I don't like the fact that when I look at some of the fates of folks that have been put in Jigsaw traps versus what the heinous act is that they committed, and then you have this woman, the way we do things with her. I'm sorry. I was just about to say a spoiler, but we're not doing no spoilers. But the way we handle her in comparison to some of the other people that have been, at the sites of Jigsaw really pisses me off. And I do not like the ending. And obviously they end the movie where they are setting up a sequel, but I'm not a fan of how we ended it. I'm not a fan of the decision that we made with our villainous character, with how to end the movie. But thoroughly enjoyed Saw X. And I'm like, thank God we are bringing this franchise back home into like a good arena where I can start caping for Saw again. Because it's been hard to be like, yeah, Saw the Saw franchise. They was falling off. For me personally. So I like this new direction that we have gone in with Saw X. Coming in at number 4 is the movie that was the literal very last movie I saw of 2023. I saw this on December 31st, and that is Godzilla Minus One. And this is our creature feature monster action horror movie, and I have never really been a fan of Godzilla, and I honestly can't tell you why. I love a creature feature, but those movies just have never really been on my radar. But I went to see this because this is one of those movies where, like, I would have eventually saw it, like, one day on HBO Max or something, or streaming on TV. But the fact that everybody kept raving and saying how Godzilla Minus One was the best movie of 2023, I said, okay, you know what? Let me go watch this goddamn movie. Yeah, not the best of 2023 in my opinion. I mean, obviously we see it's here at number 4, so it was very good. I wasn't the biggest fan of like 2/3 of the movie. It felt very like a Japanese melodrama soap opera, and I personally was just not very into it. But I do love the fact that we added a heart to the story. I was definitely rooting for the characters. I did not want anything to happen to anyone, so the writers knew what they were doing, giving us all of that drawn out melodrama with the characters because it worked on me. But the actual creature action part of this was literally so chef's kiss. It was so good. And Godzilla was giving me Terminator vibes, okay? Like, he will not eat, he will not stop. And the design of Godzilla, the thing that really stands out for me was the eyes. We have scenes where he is stalking this fishing boat in the water, and just that sense of dread looking into Godzilla's eyes, the way he moves in the water was so very well executed. And I need American filmmakers to take note, because the great effects we got with this low budget, which I mean, compared to the budgets of some other American movies that have terrible effects, this was a low budget. And I'm just like, how the hell did this guy do what he did with this budget, but American filmmakers can't do even half as good with $100 million budget and all this other crazy stuff? But I am definitely on the Godzilla bandwagon, but I can't fly the flag of like the greatest movie of 2023. But it was definitely very solid. Coming in at number 3, No One Will Save You. We have an alien invasion movie with a interesting spin of no dialogue. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 lines of dialogue in the entire movie. And the way this was executed, honestly, when I was first watching the movie, it didn't even really dawn on me that I wasn't getting dialogue until I want to say maybe 20-25 minutes into the movie. There's a point where our lead goes into town, runs into like a cop and someone, and that was the moment when I was kind of like, oh, well, come on, like, y'all gonna say something? But up until that moment, I wasn't sitting there watching a movie with the prevalent thought of nobody's talking, I literally kind of didn't really notice it, honestly. I was so enthralled with everything else happening in the movie. It really sucked me in to the point that I was not sitting there missing dialogue. I absolutely love how this movie was executed. I absolutely love our lead actress. I mean, to carry a film and you can't even talk, you just have to do physical acting, that can be such a task, but she pulled it off so well. I absolutely love the alien design, the alien sounds that they made, the way the aliens moved. All of that worked so brilliantly for me. There were so many shots and moments. And you know what? A lot of times I can be a bit hard on the movie where I'm like, oh, this is boring, I'm not into this. Where's the action? Honestly, I felt like that with that first part of Godzilla, with the first part of Saw X. I was like, okay, man, where's the action? Let's get to it. No One Will Save You, though, even though the action and stuff with the aliens was so good in those sequences where we're fighting aliens, I wasn't feeling like that in this movie. Like, just following the story and the character was enough to keep me completely engaged. Now we are in the top 2 best horror movies of 2023. Coming in at number 2 is a movie I cannot believe. Well, I can't believe more people are not talking about. The Blackening. This is our comedy horror that we got this year. It is more of like a satire on black people in horror movies, black characters, and we have this slasher comedy setup where a group of black friends go on vacation to a cabin to celebrate Juneteenth, and we end up getting killed by this racially charged game. And I am not a fan of comedy. It is my least favorite genre. And I am absolutely not much of a fan of comedy horror. I do not like comedy in my horror. Of course, I have gems of comedy horror that I really love. But I prefer my horror to just be completely dark and serious in tone. I'm not the biggest fan of adding anything comedic. I don't want to break intention, but I went to the theaters to see The Blackening and I loved it. I was laughing from top to bottom. And one thing I will say is one of the reasons I don't like comedy in horror is because I feel like we typically kind of forget the horror elements. We add a lot of comedic elements, and I feel like we fell into that pitfall with The Blackening. I wish we could have got a lot more actual horror in here. I wish it wasn't so painfully predictable and obvious. I literally called the killer and the killer's motive, I swear to God, in like 10 minutes of watching the movie. That was very annoying. And I wish instead of us playing into tropes, I wish we would have done something completely different and subverted that expectation. But outside of that, I feel like this is one of my favorite, if not my number one favorite ensemble cast of any movie in 2023. I love the entire cast. Everyone was so talented. Everyone had their moments to shine. I loved and enjoyed all of the characters. I feel like this was just so well executed. And I'm here for a sequel. Like, let's get another group of black friends that, you know, we end up in this scenario, but let's add some more horror, okay? And let's not make it so predictable. But I would definitely be here for a sequel. I feel like this is one of those movies for me that was just so groundbreaking for not only black filmmakers, black people in horror, but groundbreaking for the comedy horror genre. But I need people to add more actual horror when we are approaching a comedy horror. And I also love the social commentary in The Blackening and how it was handled. It was not heavy-handed. It didn't feel preachy. It was kind of like, it was the comedy. Like, there is a sequence at the very end of the movie where everything is done and all the black people are trying to figure out how we call the cops without getting killed. It was so hilarious how it was done. Like, the movie is saying something poignant, but it's giving it to you in a way that's easy to swallow and you can have fun with. Now, coming in at number one, my number one favorite horror movie of 2023 is Evil Dead Rise. And it is only fitting that this is my number one horror when this is the franchise that introduced me to horror. I saw the original The Evil Dead when I was like 3 years old. So when people talk about like, oh, this is an easy introduction to horror, I did not have an easy to swallow introduction to horror, okay? My mother is a movie buff. Horror is her favorite genre. And I was watching stuff I had no business watching, okay? But I wasn't that kid that was like scared of having nightmares. So, don't do this to your kids. Because, all kids are different. But it is only fitting. I have so much love and nostalgia for this genre. And I feel like this is one of those rare occasions where a franchise that started in the 80s and isn't overdone. We don't have tons of movies in this franchise. They're few and far between outside of our most recent 2013 and now this one, which is still, far between, but not as far. But I feel like this is one of those rare instances where we are just getting better and better and we are breathing new life into this. And I know it is a very unpopular opinion for people to ever say a sequel or a remake is better than an original. But for a person, as much as I absolutely love the original Evil Dead movies, for a person who isn't the biggest fan of comedy and horror, Evil Dead Rise and Evil Dead 2013, they're coming out as my favorite of the franchise. Okay, don't send me death threats, okay? Evil Dead Rise does suffer from some character issues, some story issues, but overall, the gore, the horror, the acting, it is that mom Deadite is going down in history as my number one favorite Deadite ever, okay? And it's crazy how I I couldn't stand that lady when she was on Vikings, okay? Well, not the lady, you know, her character she played. But now she is my favorite human walking planet Earth, okay? That Mom Deadite was so good. I love the opening sequence to the movie. That music, the Deadite rising over, levitating over the ocean with the Evil Dead title coming up. It was just so brilliant. That opening sequence is magical. The gore and blood and guts, that cheese grater, like the swallowing glass, it is all so beautiful. And I will say, I absolutely love all of the references and callbacks to the original Evil Dead movies. I love the respect we paid to the original movies in this film. Absolutely love Auntie Beth as our new final girl in the Evil Dead franchise. And I would love an Evil Dead movie where we bring all the universe together. Where we bring in Mia and we bring in Ash and we bring in Auntie Beth. I would love to see that. I do wish we did more. I was so excited for the fact that, oh wow, we're not going to be in a secluded cabin. We're going to be in a city. I absolutely love that setting, but I wish we did more with it. I will, and it's like I feel contradictory. I will give them props because I love the fact that we were able to still be secluded in the middle of the city, but I wish we did more with the atmosphere, with the fact that we're in a city environment as opposed to secluded in the woods, because we could have still just been secluded in the woods with how everything went down. But those are my 10 best movies 10 best horror movies of 2023. And I cannot wait for 2024. I am so hyped and excited for the horror that we will be getting. And I'm so hyped and excited and proud because I have been a horror fan literally since I was a toddler. Okay, like, I mean, I never saw Pocahontas. My little thing that I put on the main page of my channel is I didn't grow up on Disney movies. I grew up on horror movies, and that is legitimately the truth. I was not, of course I had my little kid stuff that I liked, like Harriet the Spy, but I was not that kid ready to watch cartoons on Saturday morning. That was not my thing. I was that kid ready to go see horror movies. And when I was growing up, most of my life, horror was not a popular genre. And I recently went to look at 10 years at the box office. Just 10 years ago, no horror movies were in the top 10 at the box office. And now horror is dominating the box office. And I am so excited to see more people be a fan of horror, appreciate the horror genre. And I am so excited for where horror is going. And I know that people in the horror community, it's kind of blasphemy to not say that the 80s and to say that the older movies are the best of horror. But I genuinely feel like horror is just getting better and better and better and better. And I am so excited for our horror movies that we are getting in 2024. And if you would like to know the movies that I am looking forward to, I do have my 2024 most anticipated horror movies. Make sure you check that video out. Also, I did do a massive Final Girls tier list ranking. Make sure you check that out. I feel like there are so many Final Girls that I love and that are so iconic that I never see mentioned in Final Girl conversations, but I made sure they finally got their just due. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Make sure you hit like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe. It really does a lot for the channel, for the algorithm. And until the next one.